This video is going to display a thrift store find and a craft that I'm going to do with it. So I found this fashionista, and it is one of the few that I like in this set. I don't like this series really, but I saw this one. It was only $9.99 at a thrift store, and normally this sells for $24 at Walmart. So most of the fashionistas are like $10, but this one's a little more money, and probably because he has long hair, comes in a better package, seems to be a bigger doll than most. So I'm going to open it up and take him out, and the first thing I'm going to do is, well, examine him. He has pretty hair, but it is just weird. It's cakey, it's hard. So I do take him and wash and fix his hair. The clothes are typical Mattel cheap crappy style, so the craft is I'm going to replace his clothes, make him new clothes that are more realistic and a better quality. I do like the sneakers. The sneakers are really nice, so we'll repurpose those sneakers, but we will get rid of these clothes. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is use a pattern to make some sweatpants for him. I have two patterns here. I have one that is for my G.I. Joes and one for my Ken doll, so my old vintage Ken dolls. So they're smaller, so they need a smaller pattern. But this is a bigger doll, more similar to G.I. Joe, but you still want to take your doll and look at the length. So the length is too long, the waist is too long. So I'm going to change the waist. So this is where I would like it to be. And then I'm going to make it a little bit shorter. And I'm just going to draw those new lines in and leave a seam allowance. So for me to have the waist where I want it, I need to have a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So this gives me that. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a line here so I can keep using this pattern. I just know that this is for my fashionista, or this line is for a fashionista if I get any more of them. So now I'm going to give you the measurements that I used for this pair of pants. So you can see the length is about 7.5 inches. And then you're going to need 3 measurements for the width. So if you're drawing your own pattern, right under the crotch, you would have 3.25 inches, because you want to leave room for them to look baggy. Okay, and then 2.25 inches at the pant leg, and then at the top for the waist it's going to be 1.75 inches. Okay, so I'm going to cut out the pieces with the pattern, and I'm going to fold my material over. You want it to be folded so that it expands into a double of the piece, like a mirror image, right? So I've got my material folded over. I'm going to have 4 all together, right? So I'm cutting 2 at a time. And I might use the rim or the collar for the cuff. So I'm going to make sure not to cut the rim when I cut this out. So I'm going to take the pattern and place it above the rim on the bottom, so I'm not using that at all. And then just pin my pattern down, and I'm going to do this process twice. So I'll pin it down, and remember the material is double. It's just the t-shirt flattened out, so it's the back side and the front side of the t-shirt. As you can see, I've already cut a couple out of this previously for another doll. Okay, so after I pin it down, I'm going to cut it out. I lay it flat for most of it just to keep the material from moving under the pattern and try and get as straight of a cut as I can. But then I just cut it all off to turn it around for the corners. And for the corners, I like to hold it. I can just round it better. So I do this twice, all right? So altogether, I have 4 pieces. And the first thing I'm gonna do is sew the long side of each piece, all right? And what I'm gonna do here is a running stitch. So I'm gonna get it started. I'm gonna go back and forth a couple times to get it started. Then I'm gonna flip it over and I'm just gonna do a running stitch. So I'm just gonna go in, out, in, out, in, out, and let the material build up on the needle. And then once I've done that a few times, I'm gonna pull the thread through. Now, if you're good with machines, you could just zip this through a machine. For some reason, I'm not. I can't keep my line straight, and I usually tangle up the bobbin. So I just don't even bother with machines. And the Barbie clothes are so small, it's hard to get anything to hold on to pull it through the machine. So I just do it by hand. You do it either way, but the point is to run a stitch down the long side of both pieces. Doing this running stitch on the needle too also helps keep my line straight, and it saves a lot of time. So you can see I just pull it through, and then I'm going to do it for both sides. Okay, so both sides are completed. Now, when I do a project, I like to really add some kind of detail to make it look very realistic. So what I'm going to do is open it up, and the seam that's not showing is the right side. Okay, so that's what I'm showing you right now. And I'm going to add detail. So I want something on the front of these sweatpants. So for me, a very manly thing is to wear cowboys clothes. I think men look so good in cowboys clothes. It's just a beautiful symbol. So I'm going to cut out the word. I have this fabric, and luckily I had this fabric. You can probably order some on Amazon. You have to get it small print. So I'm going to cut out the word cowboys, and I'm going to put it on the front of the pants. I'm going to trim this up and make it look a little better. The best way I found to do this, I've sewn it on another pair. I made an edge and sewed it all the way around and tacked it, tried to make it look not so obvious that there was thread. But I had a better idea for this one. I'm going to use the sewing tape that you can just iron and it adheres. So I'm going to put that sewing tape on the back of this, and after I've got it positioned and lay it down, I will lay it on and just iron it. And this is what I used. You can find this on Amazon as well, or your craft stores, either way. But it worked very well. And just put the iron on it for a few seconds, really not very long at all. You can see about how long it takes here. And it adheres very nicely, so it saves me time having to make an edge, and so I can just cut it pretty straight, and boom, it's down, and it's gonna stay. So that's better than using a fabric glue, because it's just nice and flat. So now I'm going to turn it back over to the inside, and now you need to sew from the inseam down to the pant leg. So I'm going to do that on both sides, both pieces. Okay, so now that I've done both sides, here is the trick to make sewing a pair of pants a lot faster. I'm going to take one of the pieces and turn them right side out. So now the right side is showing. And once I have that, I'm going to turn it the same way. So if the other piece, I'm going to have the crotches line up, all right? And I'm going to stick it inside. So by doing this, by only turning this one right side out, when I stick it in here, I'm going to have right side to right side, which is what you would do normally when you sew a seam and then you flip it over and you pull the legs together, and I get really confused. So this way I keep it very straight. I know exactly which side goes where, what to sew next. It's so easy. So I'm going to pull it through and just line the pants up to where they're laying flat 1 to 1. And the right side is to the right side, and I get this, make sure the seams are even, you know, they're in the same place. So you kind of get this little like cone or cup of the pant legs. And they're together. And what you're going to do is sew everything but the waist. So I'm going to sew from one edge, loop down to the other edge. So I'm just getting the seams. See, that's what I'm going to sew, that edge right there. Okay, so now that I've done that, you can pull the pant leg back out, and I keep them inside out, so right side to right side, so the wrong side is showing. I'm going to trim down the little bit of extra material at the bottom of each pant leg, because now I'm going to start doing the cuff. So the cuff is a little tricky. It's a little hard to sew because you're going to sew round. So here is the edge of the collar, which I'm going to use for the cuff. Okay, so now I'm going to use the doll, and I want a tight cuff, so I'm just going to put it around his ankle and measure, but I see that it was too thick, so I'm going to cut it down in size a little bit. I didn't want it that long. Now I'm going to put it around, measure, cut the length, and then I'm going to use that one to measure and just cut another one the same length. So now you're going to turn it to where the nice finished edge is very even, because that's what's going to be on the bottom. And I'm going to sew the cuff round. So I'm just going to keep going around with my stitch around the edge to make a finished edge there. And what I'll end up with is a circle, basically, that you could put your finger through. So once I have that, I'm going to take that circle and put the nicer edge down into the pants. So the edge that's going to be at the bottom by his ankle eventually. So you put it in until the seams line up. So I'm going to have the seam of the cuff line up with the seam of the pant leg. And I'm going to start there. So I'm going to put my needle in and out once. Then next, I'm going to start to pleat the pant leg, because you can see the pant leg has a lot more surface area than the cuff. So what I'll do with that is take the material and fold it over and then sew through that fold or through that pleat. And I'll do that one time. Then I'll flatten the material and put a stitch through with it flat. And then after doing one side in and out with it flat, I'm going to fold the material again and make another pleat and go through that pleat. And I'm going to keep doing that all the way around until I have it complete. And I'm going to do this for both pant legs. So you can see it's a little bit difficult, but it can be done. So now I'm going to try it on the doll, and you can see the cuffs at the bottom look good. The waist is going to look huge at first when you first do this, but you just hold it together so that you can see what the pants will look like once the waist is done. I check the length to make sure this is gonna leave me enough seam allowance to do what I want to do with the waist. because I'm not just going to put a drawstring, I'm actually going to put elastic. So everything is good, the fit is good on the doll, so now I'm going to do the waist. You can see with the waist what I'm going to do is actually turn it down. Oh, the cuffs, there's the cuffs, they look great. So I'm going to turn it inside out again, but not all the way because I don't feel like pulling each pant leg all the way through, just enough for me to be able to hem the waist. So I've got it about halfway, and I'm going to use an elastic in there. The drawstring is really just going to be for looks. The elastic is what's going to hold up the pants. And I'm going to measure around his waist and do it pretty accurately to it. Then I'm also going to take a drawstring or a piece of yarn that looks like a drawstring. I like this yarn, it's a little rustic looking. And I'm going to measure double the length of the waist. So I'm just going to use the elastic to eyeball my length. And you want at least that much so that you have enough sticking out when you're done to look realistic. Before I even do the pants, before I put the elastic in, I sew it together and just make a complete circle. So I make sure that I go through the elastic center. A lot of times your needle wants to slip out to the edges. Okay, so I'm gonna fold this material over it, leaving like a space. So I'm not sewing the elastic to the pants at all. I'm making a tent around them. And before I even start sewing it, I will put everything in there first, including the drawstring. So right now I am sewing the elastic together, and like I said, make sure that you go through the middle of the cord and not just catching threads on the outside because it just kind of unravels it. So this makes sure it stays really well. And so I pull that together and make a circle, and I put it over the pants, and then I'm gonna fold that waist down over the elastic, and you just keep pulling it straight as you're sewing. Don't let it really bunch up. I just keep pulling it along the elastic, keeping the part that I'm sewing flat so that I get enough stitches in and I'm not putting any artificial pleats. The cord is also something you want to make sure that you're facing the front. So I feel inside to feel where that Cowboys sign is, because I want that to be the front side. So I want my cord to come out that front side. So I had to actually flip it over. And now what I'm going to start with is one side by the seam, and I'm going to fold it down and make sure I have that cord coming out. That'll be my left side in the front. And I'm going to start that little tent over both the cord and the elastic and just start sewing a running stitch all along underneath it. So I'm going to go in and out. It doesn't, the outside is what's going to show. So I'm doing that same stitch I did for other hems, where the stitch that comes back through from the front side that's going to show, I do it very close to where it came out. And then I make time, or I make ground on the inside. I'll move it along a lot further, maybe 3 times the length inside. And then when I pull it out, I put that stitch again right next to where it came out, so that you don't see a lot of stitching on the outside. I don't want to see that. I want it to be almost something that you don't notice at all. All right, so when you're done, you can turn the pants right side out, and make sure to pull your cords. They're coming from the inside. I'm going to pull them up and over, make sure I've got the ends tied in a good knot. And so there's the pants. I'm going to try it on the doll and make sure everything fits and it's the right length. And it turned out that these pants fit very well. They look really nice. They're very detailed. They've got the cuffs at the bottom. They've got the Cowboys signage on the side, the logo of the words, and the drawstrings coming over the front, and they look really good on him. Just a really nice set. But, and I'm putting the sneakers back on, which I love. And also with these sneakers, what's so nice is that they're made for the left foot and the right foot. Back in the 60s and 70s, the shoes were ambidextrous. They could go on either foot, but now they're very specific and curved on the inside like a shoe would normally be. So they're very realistic looking. They look great. I love the look. I just wish I had a pair of white socks. I don't like the ankles showing. I would love to have a pair of white socks to go with this. So maybe that'll be another project I'll do later. But it looks good, but I'm not satisfied. I do want to make a shirt to go with it. But the shirt, I don't want to make out of the t-shirt material. I feel like for Barbie size, that t-shirt material would be too thick for a shirt. I want it to look like a muscle shirt, and he has good muscles on his arms, so I'm going to use this stretch fabric, but it's kind of see-through, so I need to double it. So every piece I'm cutting, I'm going to double. So I have this shirt for the bigger guys, the G.I. Joes, so I'm just going to check and make sure that it works for this fashionista. And it is a bit long. I don't want the shirt that long, so I am going to fold it up and shorten this pattern just a little bit, but I'm going to leave the arms the same. I think they look like a good size. I could make them a little smaller, but I'm just going to leave them for this first time. And you see here, I need to also add a seam allowance. So I have one fold for how short I want it to be, and then I'm going to add a 1/4 inch for the seam allowance. And just write down that this is my fashionista line. And I need to do the same thing for the other pieces. Well, the other piece. So the other pattern, you cut 2 of the shorter pattern, and I'll also make that for the waist. Okay, so for the 2 back pieces, which is like the half pattern, I need each piece to be 2 layers thick. And I need 2 of them, so I'm going to need 4 layers of material for this if I just want to cut it once, which I do just want to cut it once. So I'll put that pattern on there and pin it down, and then cut it out. So here I am making layers of 4, which with this kind of material, which is kind of hard to cut because it moves so much. Now I make a mistake here, which I'm going to have to pay for later. I didn't fold it at the seam allowance. I folded it at the shorter, like the end version. So it makes these come out a little shorter than my front piece, which in the end should have made it come out to be shorter than I wanted the shirt to be, but it worked out that this was the perfect length. So I just had to cut the other piece to match it because this piece was shorter than the other one. This material is harder to keep still and cut right, so I hold each little bit that I cut along the way. So I just keep holding it and cut little sections at a time while I hold the material still, because it is very stretchy material and you could end up cutting your pieces way too short, or it moves a lot and they won't be straight. So it's not easy to cut. Now I'm going to cut the top piece, which I'll just have 2 layers because I only need 1 piece of this. So I want 1 doubled piece. Again, I'm going to go ahead and cut the extra material off because it's also very heavy and keeps pulling the whole thing down. So I try and keep it on the table, but I'm going to have to pick it up. And because the material moves the way it does, the neck doesn't actually come out right. So I have to adjust and fix it. So you just lay the pattern down on it a second time and make sure. Now I could tell when I looked at it that this neck was not correct. So when I lay it down, you see that the neck is not rounded like it should be. So you just adjust, recut, and get it as close as you can, because you can fix a lot of this when you're sewing the seam around. So I'll take the other two pieces, separate them to where I have two on each. And the next thing you're going to do is, well, I want to add the detail to this shirt. So I'm going to add a star to the front of the shirt. So I'm going to cut out my material. You got to be very careful too to cut right along the edge. I want to leave a little bit of white edge so that the star really stands out. If I cut it right next to the blue, it wouldn't stand out as much. So I really want it to look like that Dallas star with the white, the blue, the white, the blue, outlining it very nicely. So I'm going to do the same thing with the sewing tape and iron this to the front of the shirt. And I think it turned out pretty nice. Now I'm going to have to sew the shoulders to the shoulders. So you're going to do inside to inside. Our right side is going to face right side. And sew the shoulders together. So now I've got the two pieces sewn on at the shoulders, and it looks like this. So now we got to start doing some hems, and the first hem that I'm going to do is the neckline. You can add a collar to this. I am terrible with collars, especially with this material, so I'm just going to fold it over and sew a seam. I take the seams where they're sewn together and I flatten those out, so I pull them apart and flatten it down before I fold over to do the stitch along the neck. So I'm just folding it over and doing a straight stitch along the neck to make it easy for me. If you wanted to, you could lay it down, draw a semicircle, and cut out a collar. But I find I did that with the last one. It was just a lot of work. So I think this is looks just as good, and it's easy. I'm doing the same thing, same kind of stitch for something to show. Whenever I'm doing a seam that's going to show on the outside, I'm going to go out and then come in almost exactly where I came out of, so that the stitch is very close. Then on the back side is where I make time. I move it along a little chunk, but where I come out on the side that's going to show, I put the needle back in almost in the same exact place, so it's not a lot of stitching on the outside. And in the end, this ends up being totally not noticeable, so it worked. So I have completed the collar. It's stitched all the way around. So the next thing I want to do is hem the sleeves. And so this pattern that I drew, it's easy. You fold it right to where that little V is, because it's a muscle shirt. I don't want a lot of sleeve. And I'm just going to fold it over, do the same thing, flattening that hem in the middle and stitching it up. And again, I'm going to be careful with my stitches so there's not a lot showing on the outside. So when I go out, I come in at almost the exact same spot. I keep that stitch very close on the outside, but on the inside, I move it over a lot to make up time. Really, you just want a nice finished edge. It's not a seam that is going to be pulled apart. It's just a hem. And so I do that for both sleeves before I go on. So I'm making this hem, this finished edge. Now I've got both sleeves completed, and what you're going to do is turn right side to right side, so you're looking at the wrong sides, and I'm going to match the hemmed edge to the hem edge, so where it ends to each end, and that's where I'm going to start sewing the inseam on the sides. So I'll start right there. And this stitch I know is not going to show, but it needs to be somewhat close together. So what I do here is I hand stitch the whole thing pretty close together and do both sides. So now both sides are sewn on. Now the next step is to try it on the doll to make sure we have enough space in the back for our hem allowance to fold it over and make our finished edge. And we want to see just how much space we do have. So always along the way, keep trying it on your doll that's going to be wearing it. So already I'm starting to see how nice this shirt is going to be. It's going to look great. This doll already looks 100% better with decent clothes on him, especially the beautiful Cowboys colors. So I see that especially with the stretch material, I have plenty of room to fold it in and make my finished edge. I'm going to go ahead and use the 1/4 of an inch. I will temporarily pin this just so I can see what the other side is going to look like. Make sure I have enough space to do that 1/4 edge on both sides. And I want it to be fairly tight and tapered in a little bit. So I'm going to put 4 pins or 4 snaps down the back. And I'm probably going to draw it in a little bit around the waist because that looks so good. I want this to be a very sporty look. All right, so what I'm going to do to get that effect is I'm going to fold it over the 1/4 inch at the top, but I'm going to angle it in. So I'm going to come way in on my seam. So you can see that angle that I'm going to do where it just tapers in. I'm going to do that on both sides. So I'm going to sew it down that way and just start going in and out. And I'm going to sew this by hand all the way down. I'm not going to bunch it up on the needle. I'm going to do it 1 stitch at a time to make sure it goes straight and keeps that angle all the way down. So here he is. Here's the finished product. I think he turned out pretty well. The shirt looks great. The pants look great. Everything looks detailed as soon as I take my hairs off. And here he is with the whole gang watching our beloved Cowboys on TV together. And I think he turned out well. It's a great outfit. Thanks for watching.